Hi guys, I'm back. We have finished reading 6 chapters. Um, Lots has happened. We have found out that Mary could possibly be what's called a healthy carrier. That means that she's not exhibiting signs or symptoms of the disease, but she very easily could have it and be passing it on to other people. So, that being said, this gentleman, George Soper, decides he wants to try and track her down and talk to her and try and get some samples from her. But walking up to someone you don't know or have never seen before, from Mary's perspective, and asking for samples of your urine and feces probably isn't a good plan. It was very, very strange during this time period, and she probably did not really understand what was going on, to be completely honest, and was very scared and shocked and all those types of things. So, the encounter does not go well, and we ended chapter 6 with him waiting for her at her friend's house because he followed her from work one day and found out where it was that she was going and decided, oh, I'm going to be friends with this guy that she hangs out with. Don't know what their friendship is about, but I'm going to go hang out with him and convince him to let me wait on Mary for when she comes to see him next. So, hopefully, she doesn't kill him. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. So, this is the beginning of chapter 7. It is called In Which Extraordinary and Arbitrary Powers Are at Work. I'm already trying to yawn. At the appointed time, George Soper stood outside Brehoff's door. He had brought along Bert Hobbler, a friend and associate who was also a medical doctor. The two men waited in the dimly lit hallway for Mary to return from work. We don't know where Brehoff was, if he was bellied up to the bar in his favorite corner saloon or cowered inside his room, knowing that he had just betrayed Mary. At last, the roaming house door creaked open and closed. Mary's thick-soled shoes could be heard on the stairs. She must have been tired after 14 hours or more spent on her feet. She may have splurged on a ticket for a horse-drawn taxi or for the elevated train. Most likely, she walked the 39 blocks home. Mary rounded the last stairwell and at the top came face to face with two men. She recognized Soper right away. Mary was angry at the unexpected sight of me, he acknowledged later on. If Soper was nervous, he didn't say. He addressed Mary using the words he had scripted. We explained our suspicions, recalled Soper. We pointed out the need of examinations which might reveal the source of the infectious matter which Mary was, to a practical certainty, producing. Again, Soper requested samples of her urine, feces, and blood. Mary ranted and swore. She had never had typhoid fever, she told the two men. She was in perfect health and had no sign or symptoms of any disease about her. She'd never made anyone sick. Her rage escalated. Who would have thought? She would not allow anybody to accuse her. She would not give them specimens. Typhoid fever was found everywhere in the city, she said. The instances that Soper cited could have come from anywhere and anyone, not from her. Mary had a point. In 1907, the New York City Department of Health would report 4,476 cases, resulting in 740 deaths. Why should Mary be blamed when the disease was rampant throughout the country? Mary insisted she hadn't caused typhoid, but had helped nurse the sick through their illnesses. She told Soper and Hobbler about the grateful employer, the wealthy Manhattan lawyer J. Coleman Drayton, who had given her a $50 bonus for helping him and his family throughout the illness. Wasn't that proof? Mary probably didn't understand that she could be a healthy carrier. She probably didn't understand or accept the scientific fact that tiny microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye cause disease, and that a person looked and felt healthy might still carry and spread the germs. We don't know why Mary didn't trust science and doctors According to social research, a person's trust level is set by his or her mid-20s. After your mid-20s, your level of trust, pardon, your level of trust is unlikely to change. Fun fact. Furthermore, the more you distrust people, social researchers say, the less civil you are likely to act and behave towards others. Perhaps Mary's life experiences had taught her not to trust science and doctors or people in authority. Although germ theory was widely accepted by medical doctors and scientists, others contested the theory. For example, the famous Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to earn a medical degree in the United States in 1849, rejected the germ theory of disease. She believed that disease was caused by immoral behavior, not a chance encounter with germs. Sorry. Other people held old-fashioned ideas that sickness and disease were caused by exposure to miasma, a foul-smelling, poisonous mist or vapor that arose from garbage filth in the sewers. In other words, if it smelled bad, it could cause disease. Mary Mallon wasn't all that different from many Americans today. Whereas the majority of Americans today, as high as 96%, according to a Gallup poll, trust their doctors, only 36% trust the information they get from scientists in the scientific community. 51% of Americans say that they trust scientists and scientific information a little bit. 6% don't trust scientists and their facts at all. If Mary were alive today, she might be part of the 6% who don't trust science, or at best, part of the 51% who partially trust science. Mary also didn't trust George Soper and the New York City Board of Health, which oversaw the Department of Health. The Board of Health was composed of medical doctors, a police commissioner, and other professionals. Some members were appointed by city mayor, others by the governor. By comparison, many Americans today, as many as 79%, don't trust their local government. They also don't trust government agencies such as their Department of Health. Even today, there are people who adhere to old-fashioned and sometimes wrong-headed ideas about sickness and disease. For example, you can't catch a cold or the flu by not wearing a coat or having wet feet or sleeping in a drafty room. You must come in contact with the bacteria and the viruses. You should not starve a fever and feed a cold. Both illnesses need the nutrients of a balanced diet to fight off infection. Vitamin C will not cure the common cold, but it is an important antioxidant, a substance that repairs cells damaged by everyday activities. Garlic and onions will not ward off the cure for the flu, but your breath may ward off friends and family if you eat too much. The best way to avoid catching and spreading a contagious disease is to arm yourself with the correct medical information, get vaccinated, take the proper precautions, and practice good hygiene and sanitation habits. As Mary raged in the hallway, Soper concluded that he would not reason with such an emotional and irrational woman. The two men retreated, escaping down the stairs. The whole while, Mary swore at them, throwing at them a volley of imprecations. We were glad to close the interview and get down to the street, Soper recalled. We agreed that it would be hopeless to try again. Mary never spoke of the incident. We are left to imagine what transpired when she faced her friend Brehoff, who had betrayed her. As George Soper fled the rooming house, he was convinced more than ever that Mary Mallon was an irrational woman. Once again, he had explained the situation to her and spoken of her responsibility to protect others. He had pleaded in the interest of science and humanitarian considerations. but she was too emotional and irrational to understand. Therefore, he concluded, science and human life meant nothing to her. These people. Over the coming days, Mary continued to cook for the bounds. We do not know how many days, but the fact that Mary wasn't fired raised some questions. Did the Bounds know Soper's suspicions? If so, why did they keep her on? Is it possible that the Bounds liked and trusted Mary and didn't believe she was a healthy carrier? The healthy carrier, in fact, who likely infected their daughter. At some point, someone, we don't know who, told Soper that Mary was going to quit her Park Avenue employment. This alarmed him. If Mary quit, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to find her. Soper reasoned that a woman like Mary Mallon could not be allowed to roam free. His mind leaped to the great danger she presented to New York City. It was clearly a race against the clock. Lives were at stake. The epidemic fighter hurried to the New York City Department of Health. He met with two members of the Board of Health, Dr. Thomas Darlington, the Commissioner of Health, and Dr. Herman Biggs, a General Medical Officer for the Department of Health. Behind closed doors, Soper painted a doomsday scenario of the cook spreading killer germs throughout the city. He created a persuasive story using words that dehumanized Mary and turned her into a dangerous machine. He called Mary a living culture tube and a chronic typhoid germ producer. I said she was proven a menace to the community, Soper explained later. It was impossible to deal with her in a reasonable and peaceful way. In order to protect the public from the deadly cook, Soper said the health department had to take the cook into custody and conduct a bacteriological examination of her urine, feces, and blood. Recalling Mary's strength and temper, Soper warned Biggs, if the department meant to examine her, it must be prepared to use force and plenty of it. You're going to have this woman kidnapped. Soper's recommendation to arrest Mary raises the question of her civil rights. So far, the evidence against her was still circumstantial at best. She wasn't visibly ill. In fact, by outward appearance, she looked healthy. She had committed no crime. She had violated no laws. She was a hard-working legal citizen. If Mary Mallon didn't agree to the examination, did the city have the right to take her into custody? To force her to submit to an examination? What about Mary's civil rights? Our civil and legal protections are spelled out in 27 amendments to the United States Constitution. The first 10 amendments make up the Bill of Rights, which was ratified in 1791. The Bill of Rights was created to protect individual liberties. The Fourth Amendment protects an individual's right to be secure in his or her person, house, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure. The authority must show probable cause or reasons for any search or seizure. Blech. If the cause is warranted, a judge must issue a warrant that describes the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized unless an exception applies. Otherwise, generally speaking, an authority cannot force someone to give a blood sample or any body specimen without the victim's consent. An individual suspected of a crime also has right to due process or fair treatment. Two amendments, the 5th and the 14th, protect this right. The 5th states that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, though through the judicial system. The 14th strengthens the protection of due process and further stipulates that no state make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges of United States citizens. In other words, each and every citizen is guaranteed equal protection of the law. But no individual's civil and legal rights are absolute, especially when it comes to the protection of the public's health. Today, state and local laws are based on federal laws and may vary. These laws require healthcare providers to report certain infectious diseases to the local and state health departments and possibly the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC. Y'all have heard about them in the news lately. For short, a federal agency located in Atlanta, Georgia. There are nearly 100 reportable diseases. When most people discover they might have an infectious disease, they usually comply and do what their doctor tells them. In those rare instances when an infectious person doesn't comply, public health officials can require that person to undergo an examination and treatment. Still, health officials must follow the law. They must respect a person's legal rights. That means public health officials must work within the law and with law enforcement officials and the court. They must treat people who suffer from disease fairly. In 1907, however, the New York City Department of Health had a board of medical doctors that had legislative, judicial, and executive powers. This gave the Board of Health absolute power. It could create laws, pass the laws it created, and enforce the laws it made. Moreover, its regulations on public health matters were final. No other person or body could review or reverse its decisions. Years later, Dr. Biggs admitted that the power wielded by the New York City Board of Health was unique. I do not think that any sanitary authorities anywhere have had granted them such extraordinary and even arbitrary powers as rest in the hands of the Board of Health, Biggs told a group of health officials at an international conference. But never before had the health department arrested someone who appeared healthy. Biggs listened carefully to Soper. He agreed that Mary had to undergo an examination in order to protect the public's health. In doing so, Biggs relied on a provision of the Greater New York Charter. He believed that the charter gave the health department the right to take Mary into custody. Moreover, he believed that the charter made it the department's duty to do so. Provision 1169 of the charter stated, "It shall be the duty of said Board of Health to aid the enforcement of, and so far as practical to enforce all laws of this state, applicable in said district to the preservation of human life, or to the care, promotion, or protection of health, and said board may exercise the authority given by said laws to enable it to discharge the duty hereby imposed. The Board of Health shall use all reasonable means for ascertaining the existence and cause of a disease or peril to life or health, and for averting the same throughout the city." Still, Biggs didn't want to use force. He wished to get the specimen peacefully if possible. Perhaps a woman would have a better chance with Mary Mallon, he decided, and Biggs knew just the woman for the job. Goodness, so that was a lot of information. It talked a little bit about our rights as humans, obviously, as granted to us by the Constitution, but it also talked about how during this time period, the health department in New York City was able to kind of act like their own government agency. They could say, okay, hey, this is a law now. Now y'all have to follow it, and these are the cops or whatever that are going to help enforce that and make sure that y'all are following that. So Soper is unsuccessful again in his interaction with Mary, and he decides to go to the health department, or this Board of Health, and convince them that they need to step in and interfere with Mary's life, basically. And they agree with him and decide that maybe we do need to collect these samples. We don't want to use force. Maybe we can convince her, because you weren't able to convince her, maybe we can. And maybe a woman can speak to her and she'll understand it more instead of a man trying to force her to produce these samples. So, hopefully, this goes well. We'll see. Think about it.